The night Liam Kovar walked into the Fairmont Chateau Laurier, wearing a borrowed suit and a 7-year-old girl on his arm, he already knew he did not belong there. He had known it the moment the invitation arrived. A thick cream envelope with embossed gold lettering, the kind that felt like it was judging you just by sitting on your kitchen counter. It had been sent by his late wife's family. The Aldersons, old Ottawa money, the kind that didn't announce itself because it didn't have to. The annual Alder Foundation Gala was the kind of event where people donated enough to name a hospital wing, and considered it a reasonable Tuesday evening. Liam was 41 years old. He drove a utility van for a living, inspecting and repairing residential heating systems across the Gatineau Valley. He had calloused hands and a coffee thermos that had never once been cleaned properly, and he had been raising his daughter Maya alone since his wife, Caroline, died of an aggressive cancer 3 winters ago. Maya was 7 now, with her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubbornness, and she had refused to stay with the neighbor that evening, because she said she wanted to see where her mother used to go when she got dressed up. He could not say no to that. He never could. The ballroom at the chateau was the kind of room that made you feel smaller just by entering it. High ceilings with chandeliers that looked like frozen rivers of light, round tables draped in white linen, flowers that cost more than Liam made in a week arranged in tall crystal vases. Men in dark evening wear moved between tables with the easy confidence of people who had never once worried about the price of heating oil. Women in gowns laughed at things that were only funny if you already understood the reference. Liam guided Maya through the entrance with his hand on her shoulder. She was wearing her good dress, navy blue, with a small white collar, the one they'd bought at the Bay 2 Easters ago. She carried a stuffed fox under one arm named Chester, who had been everywhere with her since her mother's funeral, and who was missing a button eye. "It's so shiny," Maya said quietly. "Yeah," Liam said, "it is." He had come because Maya wanted to come, and because Caroline's mother, Eugenia Alderson, had written a handwritten note at the bottom of the invitation that said she hoped to see him there. He and Eugenia had not spoken much since the funeral. The Alderson family, for all their charitable giving, had never quite warmed to the man their daughter had married, the one who fixed furnaces and drove a dented Sprinter van, and whose idea of a big night out was nachos at the Sens game. They found their assigned table near the back of the room, which told Liam everything he needed to know about where he stood in the evening's hierarchy. He helped Maya into her chair and sat down beside her, adjusting his borrowed jacket. It had belonged to his brother-in-law and was slightly too wide in the shoulders, and looked around the table. 2 couples he didn't recognize gave him the kind of smile you give a person when you're not sure why they're sitting with you. Maya set Chester carefully on the table, propping him against the water glass. "Is Grandma Eugenia here?" she asked. "Probably," Liam said. "She'll find us." She didn't. Not for a long while. What happened instead about 20 minutes into the evening was a woman walking alone into the ballroom from a side door, unhurried, wearing a gray dress that was elegant without trying too hard, and the reaction she drew from the room was immediate and quiet and cruel in the way that quiet cruelty always is. Her name was Teresa Okafor. She was 47, a structural engineer, who had spent the better part of 2 decades consulting on public infrastructure projects across eastern Ontario and Quebec. She had worked on bridges and drainage systems, and the kind of foundational things that no one thinks about until they stop working. She had not wanted to come to this gala. She had been asked to attend as part of a small contingent of professionals nominated for a community infrastructure award, and she had said yes, because her colleague had begged her. And now her colleague had cancelled that afternoon due to a family emergency. And Teresa had come anyway, because she did not go back on her word. She was not dressed wrong. She was not doing anything wrong. She had simply walked in alone, a black woman in her late 40s with close-cropped hair and a calm, deliberate way of moving. And something about that combination, the aloneness, the composure, the fact that no one in the room was rushing to greet her, made her visible in a way that seemed to invite commentary. Liam noticed it from across the room. The way a cluster of men near the bar glanced at her and then leaned toward each other. The way one of them said something and another laughed. The way the woman in the gray dress did not change her expression, but moved just slightly differently after that. The way a person moves when they've registered the temperature of a room and decided not to let it in. She sat down at a table near the window, alone, and asked a passing server for a glass of water. Liam watched this and felt something cold settle in his chest. He had seen that look before. Not on this woman specifically, but on faces he recognized. His mother at school pickups in a neighborhood that had made her feel foreign. Himself, the first Christmas he spent with Caroline's family, standing in a kitchen full of people who had gone to the same private school and who didn't know what to do with him. The specific stillness of a person who has made the internal decision to endure a room rather than enjoy it. Maya tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy. That lady is sitting by herself." "I know," he said. "Chester doesn't like when people sit by themselves." He looked down at her. She was looking at him with the same expression Caroline used to use when she wanted him to do the right thing, and was waiting to see if he would figure it out on his own. "Finish your bread," he said, and then he stood up. He crossed the ballroom without thinking too carefully about it, because he had learned a long time ago that thinking too carefully about the right thing to do was often how you talked yourself out of it. He reached Teresa Okafor's table and pulled out the chair across from her. "Mind if we sit here?" he said. "My daughter is convinced no one should have to sit alone, and she is, unfortunately, usually right about these things." Teresa looked up at him. She had the measured eyes of someone who had been managed and condescended to enough times to become an expert at reading intent. Whatever she read in Liam's face, it seemed to satisfy her. "I don't mind at all," she said. He went back and retrieved Maya and Chester, and a few minutes later the three of them were sitting at Teresa's table, while Maya explained, very seriously, that Chester had lost his eye in what she called a laundry incident, and that he was still brave about it. Teresa listened to this with complete attention, the way some adults instinctively know how to. "Chester sounds like someone who's been through a lot," she said. "He has," Maya agreed. "But he's okay now." Liam watched the exchange and said nothing. The ballroom moved around them. Speeches being prepared, wine being poured, the social machinery of charitable wealth grinding along. And for a few minutes the three of them existed in a quieter pocket of the evening, talking about nothing in particular. Then Clinton Alderson arrived at the table. Clinton was Caroline's older brother, 48 years old, a corporate real estate developer who wore his money in the way some men wore cologne, in excess, and seemingly without noticing. He was a large man with a large laugh and the kind of confidence that came not from competence, but from never having been told no in a way that stuck. He looked at Liam with the familiar mixture of dismissal and dutiful warmth that he had always deployed at family gatherings. "Liam." He clapped a hand on Liam's shoulder. "Didn't expect you to venture out this far from the shop." "Galas in Ottawa, Clinton. I live in Gatineau. It's not exactly a venture." Right. Clinton's gaze slid to Teresa with the kind of assessing look that wasn't meant to be subtle. "I don't think we've met." Teresa introduced herself. Clinton's expression shifted in a way that Liam recognized and hated, the very slight recalibration of a man who had decided, before anything was said, what category a person belonged in. "Okafor," Clinton repeated. "Are you one of the award nominees?" "I am." "Wonderful." "The infrastructure category." His tone landed the word infrastructure like it was a polite way of saying something else. "Good to have that represented." He said it with a smile that meant nothing, and moved on to greet someone else at a nearby table. And the damage was so small and so swift that most people watching wouldn't have clocked it as damage at all. But Liam had grown up watching that particular kind of harm being administered in comfortable rooms, and he knew exactly what it was. Teresa picked up her water glass and took a slow sip. Her expression had not changed. "You don't have to say anything," she said quietly. "I know," Liam said. He didn't say anything. But when Clinton's circle of friends, drifting back from the bar, made a comment that traveled across two tables, something about the awards being more about optics than outcomes these days, Liam set down his fork and looked at the table, and then looked up again. "Clinton," he said, not loudly. Clinton looked over. "I repaired the furnace system in the Vanier Community Center last February," Liam said. "While I was there, the building inspector showed me the structural assessment from 2019. The one that said the roof supports were about 30% past their service life." He paused. "The report that recommended the remediation work that got done in 2021. Work that, based on the engineering stamps, came out of this foundation's infrastructure grant." He nodded slightly toward Teresa. That report had her firm's name on it. The table had gone quiet. Not the whole room, just the radius around them. "That community center has 600 kids through it every week," Liam continued. "Hockey, after-school programs, ESL classes. It didn't collapse, because someone did the work right." He picked up his fork again. "I thought that was worth saying." Clinton looked at him for a moment with the expression of a man resorting information he hadn't expected to receive. "Well," he said. "Yes. Of course," and he moved on. Maya, who had been watching all of this very carefully, leaned over and spoke quietly to Chester. Liam could not hear what she said. But Teresa caught it, and something in her face shifted. Not dramatically, not in a way that would have read across the room, but in the way a person's face shifts when they have been carrying something heavy for a long time, and someone, without being asked, simply helped hold it for a moment. "Your daughter is remarkable," she said. "She gets it from her mother," Liam said. Then, after a beat, "Caroline passed 3 years ago." "I'm sorry." "Thank you." They sat with that for a moment, the way two people can sit with a hard truth when they don't feel the need to fill it with noise. The gala continued. Dinner was served. The speeches were long and self-congratulatory, in the particular way of events that exist to celebrate their own generosity. Liam ate without tasting much, and kept Maya supplied with dinner rolls, which she was consuming at a rate that suggested she had found her one true purpose in the ballroom. When the awards portion of the evening began, Liam clapped along with everyone else. When Teresa Okafor's name was called for the Alderson Foundation's Community Infrastructure Excellence Award, she stood, smoothed her gray dress, and walked to the small stage at the front of the room with the same unhurried, deliberate pace she'd walked in with 2 hours ago. Her speech was 4 minutes long. She did not thank the foundation effusively. She talked about the Vanier Community Center. She talked about a footbridge in Renfrew County that had been quietly deteriorating for 11 years before her firm was brought in. She talked about what it meant when public infrastructure worked, and what it cost when it didn't. Not in dollars, but in the daily lives of people who depended on it. She talked about her team, most of them, she noted, people who had taken technical training rather than university degrees. Tradespeople and technicians, who showed up every day, and understood things in their hands that you couldn't learn from a textbook. The room gave her a polite standing ovation. The kind that means different things to different people. Liam stood and clapped, and Maya stood on her chair because she was too small to see and clapped with both hands, Chester dangling from one of them. Afterward, when the dancing had started and the room had loosened into something more social, Eugenia Alderson finally made her way across the ballroom. She was 72, small and sharp-eyed, wearing a dark blue dress and the pearl earrings she wore to everything. She stopped at the table and looked at her granddaughter with an expression that softened everything. "Maya, my darling." Maya climbed down from her chair and walked into her grandmother's arms. Eugenia held her for a long moment. Then she straightened and looked at Liam, and then at Teresa, and then back at Liam with the particular evaluating gaze of a woman who had been reading rooms for 7 decades. "I'm glad you came," she said to Liam. "Maya wanted to see where Caroline used to get dressed up," he said. Eugenia looked at him for a moment, and something moved through her expression. Regret, perhaps, or the late arrival of recognition. "She'd have been proud of you tonight," Eugenia said quietly. He didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing, and she seemed to understand. She introduced herself to Teresa, and the two women began talking, and Liam leaned back in his chair and watched the room with the detached calm of a person who has never needed a room to like him. 3 weeks later, Liam received a phone call from an engineering firm in Gatineau. One he had worked with before on a commercial HVAC retrofit. They were looking for a full-time mechanical systems consultant to work alongside their structural teams on municipal project bids. It was a different kind of work than he was used to. More meetings, more documentation, better pay. The person who had mentioned his name to the firm's director, he learned later through a mutual contact, was Teresa Okafor. He called her. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "No," she agreed. "But you help make a room a little less cold. That tends to stay with a person." He laughed at that, a real laugh, the kind he hadn't heard from himself in a while. "I was going to say," he said, "that if you ever need someone to check your building's heating system, I know a guy. Is he any good?" "He's reliable," Liam said, "which in my experience is better." There was a pause on the line. "Maya doing okay?" Teresa asked. He looked across the kitchen to where his daughter was sitting at the table doing homework with Chester propped open beside her textbook, apparently being consulted. "Yeah," he said. "She's doing okay." He did not take the consulting job immediately. He thought about it for 2 weeks, the way he thought about most things. Slowly, practically, turning it over in his hands, the way he would examine a worn component, before deciding whether it could still hold pressure. He took it eventually. Not because it was more money, though it was. Not because Teresa had recommended him, though that mattered more than he would have said. He took it because Maya had looked at the job description he'd left on the kitchen counter and asked what municipal infrastructure meant, and he'd explained it: bridges, water systems, buildings that hold up, and she'd looked at him and said, "So you'd be making sure things don't fall down?" "Something like that," he'd said. She'd thought about it for a moment. "That seems important," she said. And then she'd gone back to her homework. He'd called the next morning. The night at the Chateau Laurier did not change Liam Kovar's life in any dramatic, measurable way. He was still a man who drove a van and fixed things and packed his daughter's lunch every morning, and missed his wife in the particular sustained, quiet way of people who have accepted that missing is simply part of living now. He was still the kind of person who did not belong in ballrooms and knew it and went anyway when it mattered. But something had shifted. Not in his circumstances exactly, but in the story he told himself about them. He had spent 3 years since Caroline's death moving through the world with his head down, focused on the immediate and the practical, the school pickup, and the work order and the next bill. He had not thought much about what came after survival. Now, driving home from a site assessment on a cold Tuesday in February, he thought about a 7-year-old girl who had told a stuffed fox that he was brave, and a woman in a gray dress who had walked into a room full of people who had already decided about her and sat down anyway. And he thought that maybe the most useful thing a person could do was simply refuse to be made smaller by a room. Maya was asleep when he got home. He checked on her, the way he always did. Stood in the doorway a moment longer than necessary, watching the particular stillness of a sleeping child, the way it held nothing complicated. Chester was tucked beside her, button eye missing, entirely unbothered. He went to the kitchen and made tea he would drink half of before it went cold, and he sat at the table for a while in the quiet house, in the particular silence that belongs to people raising children alone. Full and hollow at once, familiar and strange, and he thought it was okay. It was going to be okay.